of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. First item is additions and/or deletions to the agenda. Is there anyone who would like to modify the agenda from that presented? Seeing no hands, I entertain a motion to accept the agenda as published.
So moved.
Motion from Eric, support.
Support.
Support from Cheryl. Call the question. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carried. The agenda stands as published. Next item is the review of the minutes from the regular meeting of February 4th. Did anybody have any comments on these minutes? Cheryl?
No comments.
Steve? No.
No
Jim?
comments. No.
Eric?
No comments.
Okay. Entertain a motion to approve the minutes as published.
So moved.
Motion from Eric. Support?
Support.
Support from Steve. Call the question. All in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Motion carried. If Lori were here, I would compliment her on doing a nice job, because she always does a good job in our minutes. It's always much appreciated. Next item is public comment, an opportunity for citizens to speak to the Planning Commission about any item not on the agenda. Anyone want to speak about an item not on the agenda? Seeing no hands, we'll move on to the first item of business, which is a site plan review for a new Macomb Street building. The applicant is Thomas Roberts, AIA, of 458 Orange Street, Wyandotte, Michigan. And Mr. Roberts is representing the owner, Robert Gauthier, of 28275 Elba of Grosse Ile. The location are vacant, legally, it's vacant lots, lots number 28 and 29 of Grayswood subdivision. The common location for this, these are Macomb Street lots, which are immediately to the west of the entrance, the driveway to senior housing. And it's on the north side of Macomb. The proposal is to construct a 4,700 square foot single-story building for private use. Specifically, the owner intends to store and to repair antique bicycles at that location. The building consists of an open storage space in the front and a garage to the rear. The building is being designed such that in the future, if the applicant or the future owner so desires, it could be converted for commercial purposes, a typical store, basically. The zoning on this is MSD, Macomb Street District. The relevant ordinances are Article 7, Macomb Street District, and Article 21, the site plan review process. The process on this is two-step. First, a pre-application review, which was held at the last meeting on February 4th, and a second step, which takes place tonight, which is a Planning Commission review and decision. As I said, we are at step 2, and I do expect that the Planning Commission will vote on this application tonight. Just a comment on this. When the applicant was in front of us on February 4th, there was a discussion about the fact that he did not have, at that time, an easement with the owners of senior housing for access to use the driveway. And that driveway access is a key design element in the way they've laid out their property. Okay, and while they've made progress on that, and there in fact is a legal description, on that easement now, it is not formally signed. But I decided that since they were so close on this, that I would not hold up the application. I would put them on the agenda and ask if the commission chooses to approve this application, that they do so with the contingency that that item specifically gets listed as a condition of approval. So that's how it got from there to here. so to speak. So on that note, I'm going to stop. I'm going to turn to Brian. Now, a couple of things about this. You received in your package the letter from Brian, which described the application, and there were a number of issues that were highlighted in there that Brian gave back, as information to the applicant. The applicant has since responded to that. Okay, and so Brian will be not only reviewing what's in the email, but he'll also be pointing out to you the changes that the applicant has made to reflect the requests based on our ordinances. So, from that, there will be a much smaller list of discretionary items that we will need to discuss and agree on, okay, before we can make a final decision. Everybody clear on that, I hope?
Yes.
Okay, then on that note, I will stop. Brian, it's all yours.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. All right, I'm not even going to say anything about technology working tonight because so far it's been great, except I think I just jinxed it. So once again, Mr. Chair, you've covered 3/4 of my presentation, so thank you. I will try to be ever so brief. Request before you this evening is a full site plan review. This is our site in this particular area, vacant wooded lot adjacent to Island Woods, next to, it's actually between the chiropractor office and then the main drive for the senior housing. As John's already noted, north side of Macomb Street, zoning's Macomb Street. Pertinent ordinance sections are Article 11 and Article 21. If you need to, I can go back to the aerial photo at any time. Just let me know. Again, just reiterating, Section 7.2A does permit this use by right in this district. That is, it is not a special land use. It is the type of use that is intended in the district without any potential adverse effects or the need for an additional use review. And then Article 21 also dictates that because this is a new building, full site plan review is required as opposed to, say, a sketch plan review, and it is within the Planning Commission's authority to review and approve the project. So the next slide is an overview of the site plan itself. Hopefully it shows okay for everybody. It's a little bit grainy on my screen, but essentially what we've got is this is all building right here, and then there's a one-way entrance drive off of Macomb, angled parking to the east side, a few extra spaces perpendicular along the rear, and then as you noted, Mr. Chairman, this is one of the keys to the whole project, is by utilizing a one-way ingress, the applicant has sought and essentially at this point obtained an access easement or an egress easement in this case to gain across Island Woods' property and then utilize their driveway as exiting or egress from the site. So again, the traffic pattern is essentially this across, down, and back out to Macomb Street. So we end up with one smaller curb cut. We have one curb cut instead of two. The site is a little bit narrow to try to accommodate a one-way circulation pattern on the site itself. The applicant and I and staff looked at this many revisions ago and talked about the idea of keeping, if the access easement was denied, what would you do? And it ultimately resulted in a one-way pattern that was sort of a big horseshoe kind of around the building. It was kind of an odd situation, wasn't the best. I think this is a big improvement, and ultimately once we get to that point, as long as there are no issues with the access easement, I think it's really a really good use of a shared access approach, which is something we'd like to see more of. So we do have a 4,700 square foot building. Chairman has already referenced the intent here is for restoration, storage, display of historic bicycles. And as noted, I think another important component of this project is that it's not just being directly built for that tenant. This is a building that could certainly be reusable at some point in the future. Could even be split up into two tenant spaces, as the chairman noted. So if the owner is successful and wishes to stay here, he could even maintain his portion and then have a tenant lease out the other portion. So there's a lot of options, a lot of flexibility, which I think is a pretty good thing for us to see on Macomb Street. The last thing we want is somebody somebody to put up a new building that's not going to function well if we need a new user down the road. I think that's an important concept. As noted, the use as described is permitted by right in the district. These are quick views of the building elevations. The architect, project architect, Mr. Roberts, is here tonight, so I won't spend too much time on these. I'll let him explain some of this to you, but I put up a few bullet points that are some elements of the Macomb Street design standards, and in this case, we're dealing with a material list. The building is predominantly brick, predominantly brick. That is oddly hard to say. There is some architectural block. As I see it, that is only on the rear facade of the building. Mr. Roberts can correct me if I was wrong on that. And then they're also utilizing some limestone as an accent material. So for the most part, this is generally a brick and limestone building, which to me certainly equates to quality materials of your ordinance. As you recall at pre-app last time, one of the concerns and one of the discussion items was this extremely long, at the time relatively blank facade along the west side of the building. What you see tonight is the applicant took your comments and concerns, went back, redesigned, played around with it, and has incorporated sort of a mixture of design treatments and a variety of material elements that I think do a pretty good job of breaking that up. It's no longer just a big, long, blank facade. You can see these individual rectangles here. These are recessed brick elements, so essentially you have the front facade, but now there's some depth to it as well in terms of the recessed versus the main building line. There are some brick soldier courses that are used in here to break up. Again, there's limestone as an accent treatment. I think they've done a nice job breaking that up. And then the bottom left, a few other important points. The building does entirely front Macomb Street. The primary entrance to the building, whether it's one tenant or two, is off of a sidewalk that will connect to the Macomb Street sidewalk. So we keep that pedestrian scale. I think it's really something we've always tried to get on Macomb Street, and a lot of times people try to, because they're narrow, deep lots, we'll see people try to orient the entrance to the side where the view is of a parking lot and not of Macomb Street. So again, I think the applicant's done a nice job in terms of building placement and layout. I've already talked a little bit, excuse me, some of the decorative elements, the limestone base, limestone windowsills, brick soldier course that helps to break up some of the horizontal bands of the building. And they've also incorporated some decorative gooseneck light fixtures along the front of the building, which I think will give it a nice low-key sort of ambient lighting level when the building is in use. It shouldn't be anything too overwhelming. And then the last point on this, I'm going to go back to the aerial, is, it doesn't show great here, but one of the interesting things is the ordinance talks about trying to keep buildings relatively in line, so we have a consistent streetscape, consistent building pattern along Macomb Street. The building as it's proposed lines up with these existing buildings to the east, but it will place it slightly in front of the adjacent buildings to the west. So I just wanted to make sure the commission was aware of that. That's a point that's in my review letter. I don't think there's an issue with it, but I wanted to put that out there, again, just because it is a standard in the design standards for Macomb Street. I wanted to make sure you were aware of it. I don't think it violates the standard. I just think it's something to be aware of. Continuing on, I'll probably go back to this and let Mr. Roberts speak to this, but the applicant did provide you, instead of putting together a color rendering, they went out, and this is a building actually in Trenton on West Road that you may have driven by. I drive by it every time I come and go to the township, so I've seen it once or twice. But they wanted to give you an idea in terms of the materials and the design style. Obviously, it's not this building. This is a two-story building. It's not going to be this, but in terms of sort of the design inspiration, if you will, this is the model that the property owner and project architect put forth. Again, I'll let him go back to this if he wants to hit anything else. So, closing slide. What we have are a handful of issues. As you've already noted, Mr. Chair, some of these are discretionary. That is, the Planning Commission has the authority to allow, basically to allow what's been requested or to not, and to require something different. Those elements are tied to the side yard parking setback, which you may reduce, as has been requested in this case. You may modify the size requirements for a loading zone, as has been requested in this particular case. You may waive the requirement for a full photometric lighting plan. I think that was an element we discussed at pre-app last time. I didn't sense there was any real desire of the commission to require that, given the fact that there's really only wall-mounted fixtures. There's the goosenecks up front, and then there are wall packs on the side. So we're not talking about 20, 25-foot tall light poles that are going to shine and potentially cast over on other properties. So I think you were all on board with that. And then the last one ties back to design standards in Macomb Street. Generally speaking, Macomb Street design standards are looking for pitched roof buildings. However, it gives you the discretion and the authority to approve a flat roof building so long as you feel the building is in keeping with all of the other design elements. So those are the 4 items where you have discretion. The ordinance gives you some leeway which way you want to go. So we can discuss those at any point if you have questions on those. Otherwise, I think they're pretty self-explanatory. The next set of items are elements that at the time, these generally were issues in my initial review letter. The applicant prepared response and subsequent materials in support of his response, and that's where a lot of these come into play. During the original review letter, we had not yet seen the access easement language, nor a drawing of exactly where it would be. That has been provided. I would suggest, if you consider approval, that review of that document by the township engineer be a condition, and then if that's signed off on by the township engineer, it should be a condition the applicant must record that with Wayne County Register of Deeds. You also note from my original review letter there were a number of deficiencies in the landscape plan. Many of them were some of them were just simple corrections. Some of them were 2 trees short on a requirement. In their letter back to us, the applicant has noted that they will comply with those requirements. So again, I would just suggest if you're going to approve it, you keep that as a condition as well. That would be something, depending on your comfort level as a commission. Obviously, if you wanted to, that could be something we could look at the administrative level, or even if you wanted to go a step farther, we could look at that via the Site Plan Review Committee and or the officers of the commission to make sure the end result is in keeping with what the ordinance requires. The next item will be, one of them is just a standing issue. Engineering, when site plans are finally approved, the next step is to move into first stages of construction drawings. Those are then handed over to the township engineer for their review. They will look at elements such as site grading, utility connection, stormwater management plans, etc. That's kind of a standing condition, the way we do site plan review here. The other one will be, at least in my suggestion, would be any conditions of the fire department. In this instance, the fire marshal did prepare a brief response with, I believe, 4 comments that he pointed out. Unfortunately, I just got that document today, and I didn't have a chance to speak with him on any of these, so some of his fire marshal and fire code lingo is not exactly something I'm familiar with, and I'm not sure exactly the level of revision that would be needed to meet his requirements. So that would be one where, again, if you were comfortable moving forward tonight, I would suggest you keep that as a condition and then allow the project architect and fire marshal to sort out any issues they may have. I would suggest that if those issues, resolution of those issues result in a major change to the plan, I would suggest that those changes would be brought back before you and presented accordingly, just so that there are no misunderstandings about the project that's going to be built in terms of what you've seen and what you think you've approved. And then the last one, in terms of these conditional items, there's a note in my review letter, and you can see it on the elevation drawings, although obviously it's not in context of site and surroundings. But from the side elevation views, you can see here the mechanical equipment are these little squares on top of the building. So one towards the rear, one towards the front, and then this is just the opposite side. Views from the front are clearly going to be screened. That's a no-brainer at this point. Just because of the height of the parapet wall and the placement of that equipment, we're not going to have an issue. But again, as depicted, you can see here that we do have some open views along the sides. Now, again, this is not in context, so there are other buildings, there's landscaping, both existing and proposed, so there may be some other elements that will help to screen those views. What the applicant has requested at this point is they would like to move forward as proposed, as shown, and if upon building construction and completion, if those units are visible and there is an issue, they would come back and find a resolution to that, whether it be as simple as simply extending a parapet wall or providing some landscaping. Maybe there's one quick view shot, and maybe a couple of evergreen trees would block that. But that's what the applicant has requested at this time. So if you were going to consider allowing that, again, my suggestion is that you include that as a condition so we make sure that we get it done and that it gets done correctly. Last 2 points. First one, again, ties back to an item in my, or 2 items in my review letter that have been resolved by the applicant. The first was the need for details on their light fixtures. They have supplied that. That's in the packet on the dais. In addition to letters from the neighboring property owner, which authorize as part of this project, you're not going to be able to see it here, but there was, as part of the work the applicant was doing, there is a light pole and a traffic sign, stop sign, essentially, that are proposed to be relocated as part of the project. Obviously, the applicant has no authority to start moving things on the neighbor's property without their authorization. So in that packet in front of you, the applicant has provided those letters basically granting that authorization. So I feel better about those items being resolved. And then the last one just ties back to the design standards of the Macomb Street District and a couple of the elements that are not only discussed in my letter that I presented tonight, and that is that ultimately you as the commission do have the final say on the building elevations, whether there's some additional treatments you'd like to see, whether you have any concerns about the materials proposed, those types of things. Tonight would be the time to raise those questions or concerns, especially since we have the project architect here. I think we can work our way through any issues you may have on that end. That's all I have, Mr. Chair.
As usual, Brian, you've done an excellent job of summarizing the project and the various issues that the Planning Commission needs to decide on. So again, great job.
Thank you.
Before you leave the podium, though, I'd like to see if anybody here has any specific questions for you on the materials you've presented before we hear from the architect. Cheryl?
I have no questions at this time. Thank you.
Okay. Steve? No. Jim?
Was the applicant going to meet with the Macomb Street District? Wasn't that one of the things we had talked about or not? Or was that something that Jay had suggested?
With DDA?
What's that?
With
Yeah, wasn't there a Macomb Street?
Yeah, there is going to be a meeting, and unfortunately Jay's not here tonight, so we can't discuss that. But he was to take the lead to kind of organize this summer a meeting of the DDA, the Bike Path Committee, and the zoning, and us, basically, to talk about our common interests around Macomb Street. That has not happened yet. So I think that's it for that one. Eric, any specific questions for Brian?
No, good summary.
Thank you.
All right, then let's take a break and let's hear from Mr. Roberts.
site plans there.
Sure.
Just a down arrow, building elevations, down arrow for the photos, and up arrow to up there.
Welcome.
Good evening, thank you.
Evening, and, as there, you've had Brian give a very good summary. There's some additional points you'd like to raise with us, or
I
things you'd
have
like to...
very few, other than, we've worked very closely with Brian over the last probably 3 or 4 months now. We had even before we met for the pre-plan meeting, we had a meeting very early on with the concept sketch where we discussed the various options of how we circulate around the site, and the fact that it's fairly narrow and really restricted by the amount of parking to building square footage. So we've worked really hard at it, and I think we've come up with a very nice addition to Macomb Street. The owner is very enthusiastic about the project. As Brian mentioned, it is personal use. He has a passion and strong interest in historic bikes, classic bikes over the last 100 years. He collects and restores them, and the building will fundamentally be used as a display space for those bikes. He's really excited about it, and he definitely plans this to be a great addition to Macomb Street and continue to improve all the valuable aesthetic decisions that have been made over the last years. One thing I'd like to note about the scale of the building, yes, it is a single-story building, but we've definitely accentuated the vertical nature of the front facade. It is 20 feet versus a single-story that might only be 8 to 10 feet if it had a pitched roof or some other element along the street facade. So we're definitely interested in extending the character, the vertical nature of the building, yet still try to maintain a sort of a historic aesthetic based on what might have been there in the turn of the century. The adjacent property owner, we've worked with closely on defining the easement language and how the combined or shared properties would be maintained. One of the requests from the adjacent property owner is that Mr. Gauthier maintains the shared landscape space. So the green space or the green buffer zone between the access drive and the parking will become the responsibility of Mr. Gauthier. Yeah, I really don't have much to add. I guess I look forward to your questions.
Well, just what is your anticipated construction schedule?
We'd like to get started as soon as possible. We're probably looking at May 1st, June 1st.
Okay, when the weather breaks?
Yes, exactly.
Okay.
Yeah. He's, number one, he's most interested in getting the site cleared and really understanding. We've done the best we possibly can to evaluate the trees that exist. There are several that fall fairly close to the building that, they're not on top of the building, they're not on hard surface, but the drip line definitely would be, the building foundations would definitely impact the root system of the trees, so we've proposed those to be removed. But there's definitely a lot of stuff on that site that he's anxious to get off and get cleared and get the process moving.
Okay. Well, let's go around the table now, and let's see what questions and comments people have. Steve, let's start with you.
Well, thank you. It's always exciting when we see new projects coming to Grosse Ile, and definitely this one is a first for me, very unique, and looking forward to seeing the final product. On this diagram here, because I'm just thinking about parking and future use of this space. In your drawings, you have 4 boxes RTU. Are those retail units? What does that stand for?
Rooftop unit.
Rooftop unit. So is the intent? Where would the separation be if? Because I'm looking at the inside circulation of the building now. If he has a separate partner joint or coffee shop, or is he going to use this whole space right now, or?
He will be using the entire space at this point. Yep. The rooftop. So if you look at you're looking at the site plan also, right?
Yes.
So right there, where I have the hand will be one of the rooftop units. So this rectangle could be divided off as a specific space.
Okay.
And this space could be used as an individual retail unit. The garage it's really not a garage, it's more of a workshop.
Okay, so that's the workshop.
Yep.
Okay.
The door, or the connection between the front portion of the building and the back portion of the building is set up so that either one of the front units could have access to that space, or potentially both, and depending on how much we would remodel the interior, but the front half of the building is divided in two.
Okay. You know, outside of that, between last time and tonight, I think we've addressed a lot of the questions. So, thank you.
Thank you, Steve. Cheryl, comments and questions, please.
Well, it's a very interesting project, and I am looking forward to it. I just have a couple of questions, please. First is, if the rooftop unit at the rear of the building is not going to be shielded, it will then be visible by the folks in the housing that currently resides behind the unit that's going to be built? How will that be addressed if they have issues with it?
In my mind, we would look at addressing that visual issue on all 360-degree, all sides.
Okay, so it would be addressed before final plans were approved?
Yes.
Okay.
The language in my letter suggested that we would, once we determine the final heating and cooling system of the building, that we would then define what the solution is to how it's screened.
Okay.
Right now, it's somewhat undefined. It could ultimately end up being a air conditioner that sits on the ground, and that's a whole other issue that would be dealing with in terms of the site plan and where it's located. So it's just it's an issue we know we would ultimately need to address, and that's kind of how we're suggesting it at this point.
Okay, and then my only other issue, which may not be an issue at all, but I feel somewhat compelled to discuss it, is the back half of the building is going to be a workshop. Will there be any noise coming from that workshop?
No.
It will all be contained and enclosed?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Sure thing.
Thank you, Cheryl. Jim?
Am I on? Hi, great project. I'm interested in seeing it move forward. Same concerns. It's an interesting piece of property because not only do you have the road, right, the street front property, but you also have the whole complex behind it, which is right in their front window. But it sounds like there's been open communication all along with them on the project. So anything we can do to make it nice in the rear, as much as on the storefront, would be a value add, I would think. You already mentioned the parking. I think the parking's fine as long as we get the easement. I couldn't see any other way to do it, and this is the best way to maximize the space that's available. So, and I'm assuming that's underway. From what it sounds like, we have drafted up. We just don't have final approval. So.
Civil engineer has drafted the language and drawn the actual boundaries of the easement. It's been reviewed by the senior housing representative, who was also the senior architect for their properties, and provided us some review comments last Friday, which fundamentally dealt with landscaping issues and how to maintain sight lines from our property onto his property or their property and so forth. But fundamentally, it was signed, still in draft form, and it hasn't been drafted by Wayne County, but it's definitely agreed upon.
Okay, great. And then last question might be for Brian, but the side yard setback, is that the different? Is that where we're too close? Is the parking too close to the driveway that's coming out of the condo? Is that what the problem is? Or
Yeah, the parking is actually too close to that side lot line. What you have to do is visualize, and I'm pointing at my screen and you can't see that. Mr. Roberts can show you. What's happening is they're proposing to encroach into the parking side setbacks. One of the reasons, and this goes back to some of the initial meetings, Mr. Roberts and the owner and myself and staff had, were the potential to encroach into that setback with commission approval, of course. Basically, the rationale being that there's still a wider green belt between the parking lot and the actual driveway, albeit it's not their property. But it is still a green belt, and essentially there's really nothing that senior housing is really ever going to do with that other than have it as a green belt. And as you heard him reference earlier, one of the conditions of them signing off on the easement
That
was that
maintains it.
they will now take over maintenance of that particular green belt.
And part of that green belt on the adjacent property it's a swale, so it is a drainage area, which we intend to have and that's part of the easement agreement too, that we were able to use that drain for our drainage.
Gotcha, okay. Makes sense. Looks great. I'm all set, thank you.
Thank you, Jim. Here.
No, I mean, obviously, you guys listened well and took the comments that we had at the sketch plan review to heart. Parking was one of the big ones. I'm happy to see that you have figured out. So I don't have any additional questions.
Okay. Just several questions and comments. First, there was a note in Brian's report about the 2-foot wide sidewalk running from the east to, or north, south to the north. What is...
It's really not intended to be a pedestrian sidewalk. It was more just a curb or a buffer against the building. So if there's an issue with that, we could certainly look at that. But it was intended to be a curb or a buffer to the.
Okay, so it's not a 2-foot sidewalk.
It's not intended to be for pedestrian use.
Okay. Could we go to the slide that you have that has the discretionary items of the Planning Commission? I'd like to review that.
Just the arrow, right?
There we go. Okay, I'd like to kind of talk about these a little bit. Under discretionary items, these are items that the Planning Commission has the authority to waive or modify the standards. In many cases, we have no discretion. In some cases, we do, and these are the areas that we do, at least as far as this application is concerned. Reducing the side yard parking setback from 10 feet to 5 feet. Normally, that would be a problem for me, but in this case, because it directly abuts against a wide stretch, okay, of setback area, basically from the driveway to senior housing to the east, that in effect is making a better use of the overall property.
Right.
So I'm not worried about the fact that only 5 feet of it is on your property. You, in essence, have maximized with the synergy with senior housing to the east. So I think that's perfectly logical. The loading zone, 500 square feet versus 459. That standard is in there, assuming there's going to be big trucks coming in. Okay, there aren't going to be big trucks coming in, either in this application or in any reasonable probability for anything commercially that we're going to those two buildings. So I'm not worried about that either. So that to me is perfectly fine to waive that standard. As far as the requirement for the photometric lighting plan, that's not a big deal. Okay, that's meant for far more complex projects than this. Sure. It's not worth your time or money or our effort to have you go get one. Okay, the flat roof versus the pitched roof in MSD. Here the thing I look at is the compatibility with adjacent buildings. Okay, and I think in this case, where it's located, I think we're fine. There might be other spots on Macomb Street, if you would have put this in, where it wouldn't be compatible.
Yeah, I'd agree with you.
I think in this particular case, to me, these discretionary items, that's exactly why they're discretionary. We have the ability to look at them and make a logical decision. So I support that. As far as these conditions down here, I think every one of these conditions that Brian listed needs to be in the given final motion as we move forward. They all make perfect sense. The last one, I find it a little bit disconcerting because what the rooftop equipment is shown as rooftop equipment. Okay, on your drawing. Now, it may be a different type of rooftop equipment, okay, with different dimensions than what it is you've had, or it may end up, as you said, potentially on the ground, which has certain issues. But whether it's there or whether it's on the roof, fact is it's supposed to be screened. Okay, and rather than saying, I would have preferred to have you show on your drawing the fact that it was screened.
Okay.
Okay, I think that, and then how exactly you do that, would come with the specifics of whatever HVAC unit you have and the dimensions of that unit. But, I just don't like seeing that drawing with those HVAC units, sticking up in the air and not being fully enclosed, particularly in light of the senior housing to the rear. That is important to me. If you go back to your layout there,
Site plan?
couple of ones back.
You want the site plan?
Yeah. Okay, I'm looking at the rear of the workshop area, okay, and that is right in, as I think Jim said, that's the front window of many of the units, coming out of senior housing. And I think it's important that be screened, and I don't see any, at least in this rendition of it, I don't see any trees being planted.
Well, if you look at the adjacent property or the property to the north, it's heavily landscaped. It's natural vegetation, and we have no intent to remove what was on their property to the north.
Okay,
Understood. I completely understand your point about screening the equipment and
okay,
making it non-visible to the...
Yeah, I want to make sure that item, that conditional item is absolutely clear.
Absolutely.
Okay, when it gets done and
I'll
we
do
inspect it, Brian goes out and inspects it, you'll have inspected it first and made a determination, and if it needed it, it's in.
Absolutely.
Mr. Chair,
Yes, sir.
if I may, I think I may have also misinterpreted Mr. Roberts' comments a little bit, and you can correct me if I'm wrong. In my presentation, I was under the impression they wanted to go through with construction, see the units in place, and then respond after that. But I think after hearing your presentation tonight, I think the idea is to move forward, and when they finalize what it is they're going to do,
Then screen it.
then they will screen it, and we will see
Now,
plans to that effect.
that is a much better
Sorry about that.
way to go about it than what you outlined.
Well, that's where I think maybe there was a little bit of a difference, because my intent was, we don't have construction documents. I don't know specifically what unit my engineer is going to put there,
Fine.
So
Okay,
my point is,
we're on the
as soon
same
as
page.
I have construction documents,
good.
I'm ready to submit to the engineering department for review, we'll know exactly what unit will be there, and I'll make sure that it's handled appropriately.
I think
Say no more, we're aligned.
Okay, great.
Okay, just the last note on this, this is the way a partnership between an applicant and the planning commission is supposed to work, okay? You come in and you meet with Brian and you get the process going, and you're open to ideas, you're open to discussion, okay? You're not coming in and telling us. What you're doing is coming in and talking with us, okay, and listening and sharing ideas. That same thing happened in the pre-application conference that you held with Ann and me and Jay Frucci. Again, it was an open dialogue. Okay, how do we make this thing better? How do we make it truly conform to the ordinances and make it so it's a good fit for the community? Okay, worked great. You came up in front of us and you heard comments from the whole commission, and you went back and you modified your plan to reflect the wishes of this commission. Okay, and now you're sitting up in front of us with, I think, is an excellent plan. All right, so this speaks very well to the manner in which you have approached the project and the owner has approached the project, and the dialogue we've been able to establish. So I congratulate you on that. I wish every applicant had the same sort of openness that you've shown.
Thank you very much.
That completes my comments. So, at this point, I would entertain a motion, please. Could we put the contingencies, could we go back to that slide, please? There we go. Could we entertain, I would like to entertain a motion, please, regarding this application. Is there a motion?
Mr. Chairman, move that we approve this application pending the items noted in Brian's review. Number one is that the access easement be reviewed by the township engineer and recorded with the Wayne County Register of Deeds. That the applicant will correct the deficiencies in the landscape plan. That the applicant will address any complaints or issues raised by the fire or engineering on the final sketch plan. And that the applicant screens the rooftop equipment as required by the staff review.
Okay, we have a motion on the floor. Is there a second?
Second.
We have a second from Steve. Motion from Eric. Discussion. Hearing none, I'll call the question. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carried. Congratulations. Your next steps, Brian, I guess, would be to get with community development, move ahead with submittal of the engineering and fire details. Thank you very much. Nice job. Okay. We'll move now to the next item, which is a sketch plan review. And Hennepin Point Observation Trail and Deck. The applicant is the Groseal Nature and Land Conservancy. Post Office Box 12, Groseal. Representing them is their Vice President, Doug Teal. The location of the lots in question are lots 57 and 58 of Point Hennepin, E.W. Voigt subdivision. The common description, 2 vacant lots, waterfront lots, about 100 feet south of the intersection of Meridian and Annette. The lots are about 200 feet wide in total and about 300 feet deep, and they're on the west side of Meridian. The proposal is to construct a wood path and an elevated walkway across some wetlands between Meridian and a small elevated platform which will be about 250 feet deep into the property. This is to serve as an observation deck for birds and other wildlife. The zoning in that area is R1B. The relevant ordinances that we're reviewing this under are Article 17, waterfront standards, Article 21, site plan review, and Ordinance 208, wetlands and drainage ways. The process tonight is single step, as outlined in Article 21. It's a planning commission review and decision. There was a letter that Brian sent that had a number of issues with this application to be worked by the Planning Commission tonight, and I'm not going to attempt to go through those. What I'm going to do in this case is defer to Brian to kind of step us through them one at a time, and we'll see what comes of it. Just another note. At the time, I went ahead and placed this on the agenda knowing that the Army Corps of Engineers permit had not been obtained. This is the Army Corps of Engineers permit to put the walkway over the wetlands on that property. They already had Michigan DEQ permit. This had been granted, and I considered it very likely that the Army Corps would be promptly following suit. This, in fact, is what's happened. The Army Corps permit has been approved and submitted. So while I put it on the agenda ahead of time, again, it was with the idea that this would be coming, and that even if it weren't present, that if this commission chose to want to approve this application, we could also make it a contingency item to be able to move the project along. So, on that note, I'm going to stop. But, Cheryl, I know you and I discussed this earlier. Would you care to speak for a minute?
As it relates to this issue, I actually live within 300 feet, so I have a potential conflict and a special interest in this issue that I would want to address as a resident, as a citizen.
Okay. So, it is our policy, anytime there is either a conflict of interest or a perceived conflict of interest, that the planning commissioner raises the issue with the full commission, and that we as a body vote on whether we consider that to be a conflict or not. So that's where we are tonight on this. I should also point out, I am a member of that organization, although I'm not an officer and have not been for many years. And have had nothing to do with this particular application. I need to raise that issue as well. So, Brian, have you any comments on this?
In my experience, conflict of interest is a tricky one. Really the only black and white conflict of interest is when you have somebody who potentially has a financial interest in the outcome or the result of a particular project. That's usually the simple test. As you mentioned, Mr. Chair, I think that the more difficult element comes in on the idea of a perceived conflict of interest. It may not, in fact, be an actual conflict, but if it's viewed that way by the residents of the community, then it may as well be, in my opinion. So I do not think by technical rule that there is a conflict in this particular instance, but I will defer to our normal protocol if the commission wants to discuss and/or vote as to whether or not they feel that that it might be perceived as a conflict because she lives in the area. That's going to occur. I mean, in any community, particularly a community of this size, it's going to happen where commissioners or board members are going to eventually reside in a neighborhood where a project comes forth. So, again, I don't personally believe that technically it is a conflict of interest, but I'm also not in her shoes and can't feel what she's feeling. So,
Okay. With that in mind, I want to run around each of the commissioners up here and hear what you have to say, both about my membership being a potential conflict, as well as Cheryl with her being within 300 feet. Jim?
Mr. Chairman?
Yes, sir.
Before you do that, the other thing with the ask, I'm also a member of the Nature and Land Conservancy.
Okay.
Bring that up.
All right. Well, Jim, don't tell me you're a member.
It's interesting. The membership with you two, I don't see as being an issue. If you weren't to vote, do we have enough to even vote here with 4?
If we decide that Cheryl's residence within 300 feet of that potential facility constitutes a conflict, then we will no longer have a quorum, and we will not hear the item. It will be deferred to the following meeting.
I would think that we would want more people here, and so for this vote, only because, not that I don't think that Cheryl is that she's going to vote one way or another, but I would think that just being that close in proximity could cause an issue, not with my feelings. I mean, I think you could vote, but I just think it could cause an issue.
Okay. Steve, what do you think?
Well, I like Brian's comments that, as people who live here and citizens here on the township, at some point you're going to want to probably voice your opinion of a project or 2 projects or 3, whatever, is on the agenda. And I guess I'm kind of torn in the middle that, you should disclose it, which she's done. I think she should have an opportunity to vote, but I also think she should have an opportunity to voice her opinion as a citizen to say, here's why I agree or don't agree with it. Now, the tough part is, does that mesh here at the table and come out in this venue of a vote? I don't know. I definitely would need to hear more of this project, in my opinion, to know if there's a conflict. Just to hear it up front, I don't know. And if it's okay, maybe we hear more of the project and what they're thinking about, and then when we understand the vote better of what we're looking to talk about, maybe then we decide if we're going to defer something until there's more members. I also do feel ownership. I don't call the planning commission members to make sure that they're going to be here, but I do feel ownership that we as a team, it's our responsibility to be here for these things. And I would have to imagine it's a large audience out here today, and thank you for being here, but they're all looking for some discussion.
Okay, thank you. Just as a point of information for everybody, when this process for handling potential conflicts of interest was developed probably a dozen years ago and was ultimately run through and validated with the attorney. And just so I'm clear, I want to be clear on this for everybody. If Cheryl is ruled not to be in conflict of interest and cannot vote on this, she is, as a citizen, 100% entitled to go sit in the audience and then come to the podium as with any other citizen and speak her piece about whatever it is she wants to say. Okay, the fact that she steps down from the commission does not vacate her right as a citizen to speak to this commission about anything she wants to speak to us on a given application. And that was validated with the attorney. So that's the way the process would work if we opted in that direction. Eric, what are your thoughts?
I think certainly if Cheryl wants to step down, I think I heard, maybe I heard something wrong differently, but I think I heard that she did want to address the applicant as a non-commissioner. Maybe I heard that incorrectly.
I can address it, the same issue either way, actually. So I can do it from here, or I can do it as a citizen. It's whether or not you think I'm in conflict.
Yeah. So I think it would be hard not to perceive a conflict in this case. If within 300 feet, that's within, these are probably 100-foot lots. That's right across the street from her house, probably. So I would not have a problem finding this as a conflict of interest.
Thank you, Eric. And I agree in this point, and I think that while I have every faith in your judgment and your value system, okay, I also know that perception is very important, okay, when it comes to possible conflicts of interest, and we need to always err on the side of being the most conservative we can in terms of making sure that there isn't even a remote hint of a conflict. So I fully support your initial statement, and I think that we would be wise to take a step back and not include you in that discussion for tonight. And if that's the case, if a majority feel that way, then we will defer this item. This will not. It will be tabled. We won't even vote to table it. It will simply be scratched from the agenda, and it will be replaced on the agenda at the next meeting. Those are my comments. Okay, I would entertain a motion, please, regarding Cheryl's potential conflict of interest. Is there a motion?
I make a motion to agree that there's a conflict of interest with Cheryl for this topic, and that for the discussion and the vote, she is a member of the community, not part of the Planning Commission for the vote.
Thank you, Steve. We have a motion from Steve. Is there support?
Second.
We have a support from Eric. Discussion? Call the question. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carried. Cheryl, thank you for raising this issue. It's exactly the right thing to do for the community. Okay. So on that basis, we no longer have a quorum to discuss this item. This item is tabled and will be brought back to this commission at the next meeting. So anybody who wants to speak to that issue, that's just the way business is conducted. So, on that note, we're going to move on. To a public hearing on ordinance amendments. Okay, a little background first. Several months ago, representatives from the Hickory Island Association, or company basically, spoke to the Planning Commission about their desire that Grosse Ile amend its waterfront ordinance to reflect the unique characteristics of the Hickory Island zoning district R1F, specifically and only including those properties owned by and operated by the Hickory Island Company. The Planning Commission took the request under advisement. We referred it to the Ordinance Subcommittee, for which Jay Fucci was the leader, and Jim and I, as members, participated. We investigated this matter. We came back to the full committee and to the full Planning Commission, I should say, and had a discussion about this at the last February 4th Planning Commission meeting. We talked about what specifically was asked for. The commissioners had some various thoughts about it, but at the end of the discussion, there was a general consensus that the chair should bring this back to the commission tonight for formal review under the ordinance amendment process. So that is exactly what's happening tonight. We're reviewing a single change to Article 17, waterfront provisions, specifically as related to the R1F zoning district. That is, only that property which is owned and operated by the Hickory Island Company. Other parts of Hickory Island are not impacted by this in any way, shape, or form. The ordinances the ordinance for changing amendments is outlined in Article 25, zoning ordinance amendments. The process there is a two-step process. First, a public hearing in front of the Planning Commission. From that, the Planning Commission makes a recommendation. That recommendation is forwarded to the Township Board, who then renders a final approval. So we are at step one, the public hearing. Brian, before I open the public hearing, I would like you to kind of run through very briefly the modifications to Section 17.4.
One quick slide, so I'm going to step back up here, just go through all that. Nice segue. As you just noted, the one thing I think we really wanted to hit home tonight was the limited scope of these potential amendments. So what I've done is I've just cut out an excerpt of the entire township zoning map, and you can see this piece in orange here. That is the entirety of the R1F single-family Hickory Island zoning district. So that is the only place these proposed changes would impact. And I want to make sure that that's clear. It's not the Bayview side. It's not anywhere else on the island. It's just that limited. So with that being said, there are three proposed changes. In this instance, we're seeking or proposing a prohibition on lifting devices. Again, these are all related to your waterfront structure provisions. So any lifting device, a hoist, a lift, whatever it might be, would, if approved, adopted, and effective, would essentially limit that from that point forward. Anything that's existing that was approved would be considered non-conforming at that particular point. The second change is, again, due to the narrowness of the lots, the ordinance subcommittee felt it was appropriate for a reduction in the lighting intensity that's allowed on waterfront structures. Again, homes are much closer together in this instance. We thought if we knocked the maximum lighting level down a bit, it would have less of a potential impact on neighbors. And then the third change proposed is again tied to the established development pattern of this portion of the community with very narrow lots pushed far off the street back towards the water, and in this case it would be a prohibition on swimming pools in waterfront yards, something that is allowable elsewhere when a host of conditions are met. It's not as simple as simply being allowed or permitted a pool in a waterfront yard. There are a number of standards that have to be complied with. In this instance, the representatives that the committee met with from the association, I believe, felt that it was appropriate to just put in a flat-out prohibition. I would question whether there's probably only a small handful of properties in that area that could even comply with all of your requirements anyway, so I don't think it was really a stretch to take it that extra step. So those are the three changes proposed. As the chairman outlined in his introduction, this is up for public hearing this evening, so obviously anyone in attendance is welcome to participate, ask questions, provide comments. At the close of the public hearing, if you are so inclined, you will be in position to take action and forward your recommendation to the Township Board for their consideration of the amended ordinance.
Very good, Brian. Before you leave the podium, before I open the public hearing, does anybody have any questions for Brian?
Mr. Chairman?
Yes, sir.
If you have a pool, you need a fence around your pool, correct?
That's correct.
And what are the fence requirements right now in this area?
Currently, aside from enclosing a waterfront yard pool, fences are not permitted in waterfront yards by ordinance. So unless you have a pool, you cannot have a fence. And even if you do have a pool, there are restrictions on the type, size, and location of the fence that you can have. There are setback requirements from the shoreline, and then there's a maximum spacing from the edge of the pool. In essence, the idea being we don't want to allow someone to put in a small pool in the middle of their backyard and then fence their entire waterfront lot. So I believe it's a 10-foot spacing max from the edge of a pool. So if you put in a pool, your fence can only occupy so much, or it can only be placed so many feet away from that pool to prevent just that scenario. And I believe it's a 4-foot height max, and I believe they have to be open, if you will, in terms of sight lines. I don't believe you can do like a privacy fence, that type of thing.
Additional questions, Eric?
No, not yet.
Okay. No other questions right now? All right. Thank you, Brian. I'm going to formally open the public hearing now. Anyone who would wish to comment about the 3 potential changes to the zoning ordinance for the R1F zoning district that you see on the screen? Anyone who would like to comment, please raise your hand and then come on up. Yes, sir. Please give us your name and your address.
John Leon, 29815 East River Road. And I don't know if the overhead is are we able to switch?
Brian?
Or no?
We need some technical help there,
Yeah.
I do believe.
Nope, cameras are out, Mr. Chair.
Okay.
I forgot, that's the issue that...
Oh, cameras are out? Okay.
Can I bring this up? And
What is it exactly?
what this chart shows is the linear, what Hickory Island Company residents pay per linear foot in taxable value for their frontage. And it's a comparison to the other side of the island, Bayview. It's also compared to East River, north of us, Elba Drive, Park Lane, and it compares our property linear foot value per these other properties. And
What's the conclusion?
we pay twice as much.
Okay.
And when I asked the assessor, what is the reason why we pay twice as much, he said, simply, it's your view. And what I was going to show on the overhead was our view. And when our view is disrupted and then we don't have an unobstructed access that we all have to every lot from Lot 2, which is the first house in our association, to the very last lot, Residence 42. That affects our property values. That's going to affect the intake for Grosse Ile, because we will certainly, if our property values are going to be affected by our view and our view is not as worth as much, we're certainly going to go to the township and question that.
How about providing those to me, would you please? These are things I believe we have seen at the last meeting, but we're going to talk about them again.
I guess the last short point that I have.
Okay, just one question. You're the president of the Hickory Island.
No, I'm not.
You're not. What is your relationship?
I'm on the board of directors.
You're on the board of directors.
Right.
And this is a board of directors position.
Yes.
That these are the changes you want.
Yes.
Okay, and as a member of the board, you are representing the co-owners, essentially, or owners,
Yes.
in Hickory Island Company. Is that correct?
Yes, we have a vice president here tonight.
Okay.
If you want to question somebody else on the board.
Okay, very good. Anything else you'd like to share with us?
We're having our 120th Hickory Day that's coming up. Just for those of you who are not familiar with Hickory Island and the history that it has in Grosse Ile. I don't know how many of you have been to Hickory Island who have seen our unobstructed views and the access that we have to the full waterfront. We, on our 120th day, Hickory Day that we celebrate, we will be marching a parade of residents, grandchildren, and friends down the whole waterfront. And if you would so like, you're invited to our 120th Hickory Day. So maybe for those of you who would like more history about a part of Grosse Ile that a lot of people maybe are not familiar with or never been there, you're welcome. This is going to be far past the vote, so but you're invited.
Well, very good. Thank you for the invitation. Would you like these back? We passed them.
If it's not going to be used.
There we go. I think we're fine. Okay, yes, sir.
My name is
Please come on to the podium and give us your name and your address.
my name is Frank Moore. Excuse me, and my address is 29737 East River on Hickory Island. And just an aside, not this past Labor Day, but the year before, my daughter got married in our front yard, where we're talking about this area. And as part of the celebration after the wedding, we had everybody march down the front of in front of the houses. And I have a picture at home, but I didn't think to bring it with me. But it's one of the things that we can do down there is we all jointly use that front yard. And to think of swimming pools out there, and fences and things like that would not be very pleasant. So that does happen, and it was a lot of fun, and we appreciate it. So I'd like to keep it that way. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Yes, sir.
I'm Ron Kachowski, 29719 East River Road. Past president of Hickory Island Company, past board member, but now just a resident there. And I am voting entirely in favor of the request made by our present board. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Yes, ma'am, all the way in the back. Please give us your name and address.
Alana Koroski, 29761 East River. I'd like to clarify, it actually was not the board that sat down and worked on this proposal. Some of the people who were involved were on the board. I am not on the board. As you know, we came before you. So although there are members of the board here, this is actually something that is being pursued by not just the board, but other members of the board. So, non-members, I should say, of the board, just residents of Hickory Island.
Has the board of directors of the Hickory Island Company passed a motion to the effect of what it is they want?
Not to my knowledge. I don't believe that they've talked about, you have to clarify.
I would like clearly to know whether the Hickory Island Company board actively and openly supports this motion, not simply individual members. Does a majority support this proposal? My impression all the way along the line has been yes, that the people coming in front of us were representing the Hickory Island Company. Come on up. This is an important point.
Yes, in our minutes that we can supply you, it was a unanimous vote of our board to support the changes that we're asking for.
That's what I wanted to know.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to, but I wanted to clarify that it also goes beyond the board as well, too.
Okay, excellent.
So.
Thank you for that clarification. Thank you. Okay, others in the audience? Yes, ma'am.
Liz Hugo, 29797 East River Road. I'm here, I guess, on behalf of myself and my husband, who serves as treasurer of the Hickory Island Company. Both of us basically purchased a home in 1997, so about 15 years ago, and we decided to purchase on Hickory Island. It was the main reason why we moved to Grosse Ile, basically because of the special characteristics of Hickory Island. If we hadn't actually kind of fallen in love with Hickory Island and the way things are there, the bylaws and the restrictions, we might not be here today. I might not be here today. So I am in full favor of all three amendments.
Thank you for your comments. Yes, sir. Please come on up.
My name's, excuse me, Ralph Thayer, 29959 East River, and I'm Vice President of the Hickory Island Company. And the Board of Directors unanimously approved supporting the changes. And we're very conscious of the 120-year history that we have, and we want to maintain the frontage and the access from one property to all the other properties, and that's one of the reasons that we support that.
Thank you, sir.
Any questions?
I think we're okay at this point. Yes, sir.
My name is Joseph Susan, and I live at 29803 East River Road on Hickory Island, and I'm a resident there, and I really appreciate the fact of what the commissioners are trying to accomplish with Hickory Island. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you for your comment. Additional hands? Anyone else who would like to speak? Yes, all the way in the back. Please give us your name and your address, please.
Steve Zeckley, 29761 East River Road. I'm pretty new today. Just bought a home in Hickory Island, been there about 3 or 4 years.
Okay.
We've looked around a lot as far as for a home. Our house isn't the nicest house, but you walk in the backyard, or in the front yard, I should say, I got to get used to that, and you look across that water, we got the nicest house, and looking out at that view, and that's the reason we bought it, and we live at Hickory Island. Thanks.
Thank you, sir. Additional hands? Anyone else who would like to? Yes, ma'am.
My name's Kathleen Lavalier. I'm also a Hickory Island resident. And when this issue of the boat tax came up, when I drove down East River and West River and other places where there's boats all over the place, I realized how precious our view is, because we keep our boats at the Hickory Island Yacht Club, and the view is like it was 100 years ago, and it's part of the charm of the island. And it's very hard to quantify the value of what we're asking you to do, but inch for inch, we have the most expensive property in Grosse Ile when you look at the assessments, and it's what willing buyers have wanted to pay, and the view is very much a part of that. It's a wonderful place to live.
Thank you for your comment. Additional hands? Mr. Thiel.
Doug Thiel, 25100 Hazelnut Court. I just had a technical question on the lighting levels. It said reduce the lighting levels, but I didn't see any specific figures, so I was just curious what that might be.
Brian.
Mr. Chair, I don't have it in front of me. I believe that the current maximum is, it's all based on wattage right now, which is something that's going to have to be looked at in the future, but the current allowable on waterfront structures is 100-watt lighting, and I believe we knocked it down to 60, proposed.
Yeah.
To knock it down to 60.
It's on wattage and not foot candle.
Correct. Yeah, that's a whole other story I'm not going to get into unless you want me to.
No. Thank you for your comment or question. Additional hands? Anyone who would like to speak to this issue? Okay, seeing no other hands, I'll bring it back to the table. Entertain a motion to close the public hearing.
So moved.
Have a motion from Eric. Support? Support. Support from Steve. We'll call the question. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carried. Public hearing is closed. We'll start and go around the table now and see what the consensus of the commissioners is. Start with Jim.
I really have no further comment. I was on the subcommittee. I've been through this a couple different times, and I'm in support of it at this point in time, so I have no further questions.
Thank you. Eric.
Yeah, this is an interesting one for us, and obviously the area is very unique. It's so unique that we did give it its own zoning district. We did that maybe 7 or 8 years ago now, due mainly to the fact that it was a burden on the residents there with some of the other zoning ordinances that didn't necessarily apply to them. So I definitely agree with the uniqueness of it. I think part of that also drives the fact that the typical ordinances with sight lines and other things that would designate where we would not allow docks and lifts also are hard to quantify based on the rest of the island. So it took me a long time to get my hands wrapped around these restrictions, but I think at the end of the day that they are probably correct, or that they are correct for this area in this zoning district.
Thank you, Eric. Steve?
No comments.
No comments? Cheryl?
I do have a much better appreciation now for exactly what the benefits and what everyone really wants to move to Hickory Island for. And I don't think I fully understood that before, though I have visited and driven through, and we have wanted to look at property there. I think I have a much better appreciation for the type of lifestyle that you all want and enjoy there. And at this point, I have no comments either.
Thank you, Cheryl. I fully support this. This is the right thing to do for this particular area. And I have to say, much like Eric, it took me a while to get there, and it was only after we actually looked at this really in detail at the subcommittee level and actually saw information, saw data, saw what the impact of what our current ordinances would be if fully applied at Hickory Island as they were written, and that would have been a disaster. Okay, and it was very clear to me that we needed to make a change. So I think that we've distilled it down to the essence of what the changes need to be. I think these are the right changes, and I support them. At this point, I would entertain a motion, please, regarding a recommendation for the ordinance changes to the waterfront provisions. Is there a motion?
I move that we recommend approval of zoning ordinance amendments to Article 17, waterfront provisions, Section 17.4, waterfront requirements.
We have a motion from Eric. Is there support?
I support.
We have support from Jim. Is there discussion? Hearing none, I'll call the question. All in favor of the motion, please signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed? Motion carried. It's unanimous. At this point, the Planning Commission is now prepared to make a recommendation to the Township Board. Brian, I would like this to be, in our usual findings of fact with supporting documentation, so that makes it very easy for Eric to make the appropriate arguments, should there be any at the board level. When would that be ready? Because, Eric, when would you like to see it, I guess is the better question.
Well, the agenda is already published for the next meeting, which is the 25th of March, so this would, first option would be the second Monday in April.
Okay, how does that work for you, Brian?
We'll get it done, Mr. Chair.
Excellent, thank you. Okay, so at this point, the next time you'll hear about this will be in front of the Township Board on, when was it? April 2nd?
No, it's the second weekend in April.
Oh,
Or second Monday in April.
second Monday in April. Okay, look for it on the agenda, and it'll be handled at that point by the board, and they are the final approval.
Should be the 8th.
Okay, April 8th. Very good, that completes that item. Next item is the Chair's report. Several things. You have in front of you the budget from the Planning Commission. It was not in the package, but it was provided by Lori today. And you can see we're we're still in pretty good shape there. So money is being managed correctly. I was going to ask Jay tonight about the common meeting we wanted to have between the Bike Path Group, the DDA, and the Planning Commission. That was something he wanted to work on for this summer, and I'm sure that we'll get to that. It just hasn't taken any steps forward in the meantime. Different item. Barnyard animals. It came up as a rather interesting discussion point when we looked at the township has an issue with how to handle certain issue with basically farm animals on the island. You look at the municipal code, and the municipal code, which was probably written in about 1920, says that you can have anything, including cows, pigs, goats, sheep, horses, whatever, okay, so long as they don't bother a neighbor. That's hardly the way the island is currently configured. So I thought that was a little strange. When I talked about this from a zoning perspective with Brian pointed out that under the zoning ordinance, livestock is prohibited. However, there is no definition of livestock. So that leaves gray areas that cause difficulties for the township in administering things like chicken houses, chicken coops, roosters. Okay, where do they fall? So I guess in light of this, I had a little talk with Eric about this, and I'd like to defer this municipal code item along with the definition of livestock back to the zoning ordinance subcommittee for us to talk about a little bit at some point. Add this to our list, basically. If you put this at the bottom of the list, eventually we'll get to it. But I think if we have a chance to clarify this area, I think it would certainly help the township to be able to enforce standards more easily, whatever those standards eventually prove to be. I seriously doubt that cows and pigs and goats and whatever is in our future, so it'd be something other than that. Okay. Eric, did you have anything under Chair's report?
No, not for tonight.
Okay. Then that takes us to the next meeting date. What's the agenda look like, or the document look like?
At this point, Mr. Chair, we have table item sketch plan from Nature and Land Conservancy, so that will carry forward. And I have been in relatively, I won't say constant, because that sounds bad, but relatively close communication with the rowing club, and their expected submittal is really anytime in the next couple of weeks. The representative, I believe Mr. Ames, is the president of the rowing club, or at least he's been acting on their behalf at all of our meetings, and he wanted to make sure that I informed you that that they feel as though they will be ready to go for a May meeting.
Okay. That's what we needed to know. I would suggest then perhaps maybe the first Monday in May, which is May the 6th, would be an appropriate time. How does that look on your calendars? Steve, how's that?
Good.
Good for you?
Yeah.
Jim?
Yes.
Okay. Eric?
Looks good.
All right. Then let's target for May the 6th. And at that point, we'll have, I assume, the public hearing for the special land use. Is that what's next for the Rowing Club?
Yes, as well as their site plan should at least be ready for consideration. Obviously, anytime we have a special land use and a site plan, the process can go any number of ways depending upon your comfort level. In the past, we have reviewed both and acted on only the special land use and waited to come back for the site plan. In other instances, generally less complicated projects, you can move both forward in the same evening, but we'll deal with that when we get to it.
You and I will discuss that.
Absolutely.
Okay, and we'll bring back the Grosse Ile Nature and Land Conservancy at that time, May the 6th. Okay, any other items anybody has? Seeing no hands, then I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Motion, support? Support from Steve. All in favor, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Motion carried. Thank you very much, everybody.